Throughout time, baseball stadiums rise and fall. These wooden wonders and monuments of concrete and steel become cathedrals dedicated to the worship of this most holy ballgame. Each field a sacred space to the children that grew up on them, whether they be Little League fields or Major League ballparks. Today, we'll be talking about a ballpark formerly located on the east side of Cleveland that served its community for over 50 years. A beautiful, intimate, jewel box ballpark that was located in the Howe neighborhood and hosted some of the most memorable baseball ever played. From the worst team in baseball history to the incredible, one-of-a-kind 1920 World Series. From Babe Ruth's 500th home run to the 56th game of Joe DiMaggio's hit streak. Welcome back to The Bad Baseball Fan. Let's explore the history of League Park. Before we dive in, I just want to thank you for being here. If you enjoy the video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you can follow along as we explore the history of this great game. League Park is a blast from the past, so if you're familiar with the ballpark and know any good stories about her, leave it in a comment. Anyways, here we go. Major League Baseball in Cleveland, Ohio extends back as far as the 1879 season, when the Cleveland Blues joined the National League. The Blues lasted through 1884 before disbanding, being replaced by the Cleveland Spiders just 3 years later. The Spiders spent 2 years in the Major League American Association before making the jump to the National League in 1889. Playing in a small ballpark called National League Park, it became apparent quickly that the team needed a more proper place to play baseball. And in early of 1891, the city of Cleveland broke ground on a new, more professional ballpark. The stadium was to be in Cleveland's East Side Howe neighborhood, on the northeast corner of Dunham Street and Lexington Avenue. The location was chosen due to its proximity to a streetcar line that was also owned by team owner Frank Robison. Made out of wood, it was constructed quickly and featured a single-deck grandstand that wrapped around home plate, with a covered pavilion down the first base line, and bleachers placed throughout the park for further seating. The shiny new wooden ballpark inherited a nickname from its predecessor, League Park, and featured an opening capacity of 9,000 seats. Just in regard to shape, League Park offered a ton of character. Being made to fit into its local street grid, it was forced into an oblong, rectangular shape. A deep 375 feet down the left field line, 460 feet to dead center, and a measly 290 feet down the right field line. While the left field fence was only 5 feet tall, the right field fence was built to be 20 feet tall in order to compensate for the short distance. The support beams that held up this enormous wall jutted out into the inside of the ballpark, making the park infamous for hard-hit balls careening in random directions and confusing outfielders. The inaugural game took place on May 1st, 1891, as the Spiders hosted their cross-state rival, Cincinnati Reds. A full-capacity crowd of 9,000 showed up to watch the game, as legendary pitcher Cy Young took the mound for the Spiders and beat the Reds 12-3. It was the 24-year-old Cy Young's 11th of what would end up being a record 511 career wins. The team would finish the season with a losing record, but all in all, 132,000 people passed through the gates during the inaugural season at League Park. The next year, the Spiders would treat the fans to a second-place finish in the National League, earning them a spot in that year's World Series against the Boston Ball Club. For those who are unfamiliar, there were actually postseason World Championship Series prior to the modern World Series we know today. Starting in 1882 and ending in 1891, the National League champion played a postseason championship series against the champion of the rival American Association. But upon the folding of the American Association, it was decided that the series would continue with two National League teams. The 1892 season was a split one, with Boston taking the first half and Cleveland winning the second half, pitting them against each other in the World Championship Series. In what was a best-of-9 series, the Spiders fell apart, getting swept in 6 games thanks to a tie in Game 1. League Park hosted Games 1, 2, and 3 of the series, seeing roughly 20,000 fans pass its gates as the Spiders went 0-2-1 at home. Cleveland's dominant Cy Young managed an even 3 ERA for the series, but went 0-2, while Boston's Hall of Fame outfielder Hugh Duffy batted .462 with 3 doubles, 2 triples, a home run, and 9 runs batted in. Following this disappointment, the Cleveland fans only had to wait 3 more years to see their boys in the postseason championship series once again. By 1895, the postseason series had taken on a new name, the Temple Cup, and instead of featuring victors from a split season, it rather pitted the first and second place teams against one another. The Spiders finished the year with an 84, 46-2 record and in second place, 3 games behind the Baltimore Orioles. League Park was the second lowest attended ballpark in the league that season, hosting 143,000 fans throughout the year. But the fans that did show up were treated to a great season on the mound by Cy Young, who posted a 35-10 record, and a phenomenal year by left fielder Jesse Burkett, who racked up a .405 batting average. Taking on the pennant-winning Baltimore Orioles, the Spiders dominated the best-of-7 Temple Cup, winning the championship in 5 games, with Cy Young winning 3 of the necessary 4 games himself. The first 3 games were played at League Park, as over 25,000 fans attended the 3 home games, where they were treated to 3 straight Spiders wins. The city of Cleveland was finally host to its first baseball world's champion. The Spiders marched right through 1896, much the same as they had the year prior. 152,000 fans attended League Park that year as their team finished second in the league once more with an 80, 48-7 record. And just like 1895, they finished the season behind the Baltimore Orioles, who had just wrapped up their 3rd consecutive National League pennant. Cy Young remained in form, posting a 28-15 record, as Jesse Burkett eclipsed his 1895 mark by posting a .410 average for the season. Unlike in 1895, though, the Spiders struggled during the Temple Cup. This time, the first 3 games were played in Baltimore at Union Park, and the Orioles took all 3 to take a commanding lead of the series before it pivoted to Cleveland. I can't find any attendance numbers for Game 4 of the series, but according to the SABR, interest in the Temple Cup had begun to wane and attendance was relatively low in Baltimore. So I think it's safe to say that there was a less than capacity crowd for Game 4 of the 1896 Temple Cup. This was likely for the best, as the Spiders lost the game 5-0 and the series 4-0. The 1896 Temple Cup was the last postseason baseball that League Park would see during its first iteration, and the last postseason play Cleveland would experience for nearly a quarter century. The Spiders fell to 5th place for the 1897 and 1898 campaigns, with 1897 seeing Cy Young throw his first career no-hitter on September 18th against the Reds. Despite their all-time great pitcher, the team's poor play caused attendance to fall pretty dramatically at the ballpark. League Park finished dead last in the mark for both years, with 1898 seeing attendance drop to an embarrassing 70,496. Some games were held at other grounds in the area throughout the year, likely due to weather, so the actual attendance at League Park that season was a bit lower than the listed mark. Either way, something bad was brewing with the Spiders, and in 1899, the wheels came completely off. Early in the year, Spiders ownership bought a fledgling, bankrupt St. Louis Browns team. Favoring St. Louis and believing it would draw more fans, they decided to transfer most of the Spiders roster over to the Browns, including 3 future Hall of Famers in Cy Young, Jesse Burkett, and Bobby Wallace. The team that was left in the wake of this disastrous offseason was best described by their own ownership when they referred to them as a sideshow. The team was bad. So bad that even when teams are historically bad today, I don't think they even come close to the incompetence displayed that season. The Cleveland fans rejected this new sideshow, and attendance dropped to the point that they had to play most of their games on the road, as their opponents refused to travel to Cleveland. With only 6,088 people passing through the gates at League Park, visiting ball clubs couldn't earn enough of a share to cover their travel and boarding. All in all, the 1899 Cleveland Spiders finished the year with a 20-134 record, the worst that Major League Baseball has ever and likely will ever see. The team that had been near the top of the league so consistently just a few seasons prior had turned into a complete clown show. Following the season, the National League made the decision to drop 4 teams due to financial concerns, and the Cleveland Spiders were one of them. The ordeal was so great that it led the major leagues to pass a rule preventing a single person from having the majority control over more than one major league team ever again. It appeared that League Park might sit vacant for a while, but the vacancy was filled rather quickly. The Grand Rapids furniture makers of the Western League moved in ahead of the 1900 season and re-established themselves as the Cleveland Lakeshores. Western League president Ban Johnson renamed his league to the American League and began to quickly work behind the scenes to bring the league into direct competition with the National League. In their one season as a minor league team and with their new name, the Lakeshores finished the year with a 63-73 record and in 6th place. Roughly 84,000 fans attended their games that year. The next season, the American League was publicly announced as a major league, and as Johnson had hoped, a direct competitor with the National League. The Lakeshores, owned by a local millionaire named Charles Summers, reorganized going into the 1901 season, re-emerging as the newly minted Bluebirds, or Blues for short. Cleveland was to play host to Major League Baseball once again. The Cleveland franchise, known by many names over the years, was a charter member of the American League, and on April 29th, the first Major League game in 2 years was played at League Park, where the Blues beat the visiting Milwaukee Brewers 4-3 in front of a crowd of 8,000 fans. The Cleveland team played anywhere from bad to great baseball throughout the 1900s, all while struggling to find an identity. They started their tenure as a major league team being called the Bluebirds or Blues, but the players didn't take to it very well. Going into 1902, they chose the name Broncos for themselves, but the fans rejected it. Finally, some identity came in the middle of the 1902 season when the team managed to acquire superstar second baseman Nap Lajoie from Philadelphia amidst a contractual and legal dispute that pitted the 2 major leagues against one another. It's a little outside the purview of this video, so I'm not going to talk about it much, but the legal dispute brought the 2 leagues to court against one another, and Lajoie was banned by court order from playing professional baseball in Pennsylvania. All in all, Cleveland acquired the future Hall of Famer, and soon thereafter a newspaper poll renamed the team the Cleveland Naps, a name that would stay as long as Lajoie himself would. Through the 1909 season, the ballpark hosted some significant events, including a no-hitter by Naps pitcher Bob Rhodes against the Red Sox on September 19, 1907, the debut of female semi-professional sensation Alta Weiss on October 2, 1907, and a perfect game thrown by Addie Joss against the visiting White Sox on October 2, 1908. The Blues/Naps would finish as low as 7th in the league and as high as 2nd throughout the decade. League Park peaked in attendance in 1908 with 422,262 passing through its gates. But this was only good enough for 6th out of 8 in the American League. The ballpark's limited 9,000 seat capacity was beginning to show some serious limitations, and Cleveland owner Charles Summers believed it was time for a new ballpark. Taking note of the new concrete and steel wonders that had been erected in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh prior to the 1909 campaign, Summers contracted the local Osborne Engineering Corporation for his own concrete and steel structure. The renovation was prompt, only taking the early months of 1910, and they rebuilt the park with the grandstands being double-decked, with the upper deck sitting directly above the lower deck, keeping fans close to the field. All of the ballpark seating expansion occurred in the upper deck, as the tight street grid around the park made it nearly impossible for the park to expand outward. When all was said and done, the new park featured a capacity of over 21,000, a remarkable jump from the 9,000 seats prior. The outfield distances were slightly adjusted, with left field being moved in by 10 feet and the center field fence being moved in by 40 feet. The team also added an additional 25 feet of wall on top of the already existing 20-foot wall in right field. The stadium also featured a first-of-its-kind electric scoreboard that was designed by none other than Nap's legendary pitcher and all-time whip leader, Addie Joss. Per This Great Game, the wooden exterior was torn down and replaced with a new red brick facade, and the ticket booth was moved from behind home plate to down the right field line, where it would be located in a small, cottage-like structure near the right field corner. The first game played at the new iteration of League Park took place on April 21st, 1910, hosting the Detroit Tigers and nearly 19,000 fans. In a bit of baseball poetry you just couldn't even make up, a recently reacquired Cy Young, now 43 years old, took the mound for the Naps and threw out the first pitch. Nearing his 500th career win, the Tigers got to him that day, winning the game 5-0. Despite Charles Summers' best efforts to draw crowds, rebuilding a stadium, fielding a competitive team, and keeping the facilities and playing surface in famously good condition, attendance remained similar to the original park for several years. The original League Park, with its mere 9,000 seats, peaked at 422,262 fans in 1908. Its recreation, with its over 21,000 seats, wouldn't surpass that mark until its fourth full season of baseball, where in 1913 she hosted 541,000 fans and finished third in the league for attendance. The stadium would welcome a new baseball team in 1914, as the minor league Toledo Mudhens of the American Association, also owned by Charles Summers, moved into the ballpark. The move was done to prevent the expanding Federal League from establishing a team in Cleveland and cutting into Summers' market. The Mudhens would spend 2 seasons at League Park, going by the Bearcats and then the Spiders, before moving back to Toledo and inheriting their original name. During the 2 seasons in which the Mudhens were in Cleveland, the Naps fell apart, finishing in last in 1914 and 7th in 1915. League Park failed to surpass the 200,000 attendance mark in both years. Nap Lajoie, after a dozen years in Cleveland, was shipped back to Philadelphia in 1915 amidst a dispute with team manager Joe Birmingham, and the franchise was left nameless once again. A newspaper poll to choose a new name ensued, and this time, the name was Indians. The story behind this is complex, and frankly, ugly. I don't want to dive into it because it's outside of the purview of this video, but a lot of historical analysis points out quite clearly that the publicly voted for name was chosen with derogatory undertones, not as some sort of tribute to Native American culture. But regardless of why, once Lajoie was gone, the team would go by the name Indians, colloquially the tribe, for the next 107 years. Ahead of the 1916 season, Summers sold the ball club and stadium to businessman James Dunn, who promptly renamed League Park to Dunn Field in his honor. Upon the ownership and name change, play on the field immediately improved. The Indians finished 1916 with a .500 record, then proceeded to finish each subsequent year of the 1910s with a winning season. Attendance dramatically improved with the play on the field, with the only season drawing less than 470,000 fans being the war-shortened 1918 campaign. The Indians finished second in both 1918 and 1919, tying 1908 for their best seasons ever to that point. In August of 1919, Dunn Field played host to one of the most incredible things to ever happen on a baseball field, as Cleveland pitcher Ray Caldwell is struck directly by lightning while just 1 out away from a complete game victory over the Philadelphia Athletics. Caldwell lay sprawled out on the turf for several minutes before rising, refusing medical attention, and delivering one more out to finish the game. Even lightning couldn't stop the Indians as they got better and better throughout the back half of the decade, and it all culminated in an incredible 1920 season that would end up being the greatest season of Indians baseball ever played at Dunn Field. Dunn Field saw its attendance record shattered in 1920, hosting 912,832 fans across the season. In what would be the ballpark's most attended year, the Indians put together their best played season yet. Finishing the year with a 98-56 record, they claimed their first ever American League pennant, but it wasn't without controversy. The race came down to the wire between the Indians and the defending AL pennant-winning Chicago White Sox. With merely a week left in the season, news of the Black Sox scandal broke publicly, and Charles Comiskey promptly suspended the perpetrators. With their roster decimated, the Sox collapsed, and Cleveland cruised to the pennant. The season wasn't all sunshine and roses, though, as the team shortstop Ray Chapman became the only major leaguer to ever be killed from playing baseball. The incident occurred on August 16th during a game against the Yankees at the Polo Grounds in Manhattan. Yankees pitcher Carl Mays, a submarine-style hurler, delivered the deadly pitch, the ball striking Chapman's head so forcefully that it caused a depressed skull fracture. He died in the hospital the next day, and his mourning team wore black armbands in tribute and dedicated their season in his honor. After winning the pennant, they headed out east for the start of the World Series, which pitted them against the National League winning Brooklyn Robins. Set to be a best-of-9 series, the first 3 games were played in Brooklyn at Ebbets Field, where the Indians took Game 1 before falling in Games 2 and 3. The series pivoted to Dunn Field, where the nearly 30-year-old baseball diamond would host its first postseason play since the 1896 Temple Cup. Game 4 was on October 9th, in front of a lively crowd of 25,734. Stan Coveleski started the game for the Tribe, hurling a complete game, 1-run performance, as his offense put up 5 runs against 4 Brooklyn pitchers and tied the series at 2 apiece. The next day, 26,884 showed up to watch an 8-1 beating handed out by the home team in Game 5. Cleveland's Jim Bagby went the distance as the Indians pulled ahead in the series. That Game 5 might objectively be the coolest World Series game ever played. The nearly 27,000 that showed up to Dunn Field for the crucial game were treated to a series of rarities. First of all, the bottom of the first saw the first World Series Grand Slam off the bat of Indians right fielder Elmer Smith. The bottom of the fourth saw the first World Series home run from a pitcher off the bat of Tribe hurler Jim Bagby. Then the top of the fifth saw Indians second baseman Bill Womgans catch a hard line drive, step on second for a force, and tag the incoming base runner from first, creating only the second unassisted triple play in Major League history, and to this day, the only one to ever occur during postseason play. Actually, as of the writing of this essay, it's the only triple play of any variety to ever be turned during the Fall Classic. The day after that insane Game 5, in front of a crowd of 27,194, Cleveland's Duster males dueled with Brooklyn's Sherry Smith. Both hurlers went the distance, with the Tribe seeking out a lone run in the 6th and claiming the day. They were now on the precipice of their first championship. With the team one win away from glory and having one more game at Dunfield before going back to Brooklyn, the Indians knew what needed to be done. And get it done, they did. Stan Sockalexis dominated on the mound for the Tribe, throwing a complete game shutout as his team managed 3 runs across, and the 27,525 fans in attendance got to watch their team celebrate a World Series championship for the first time ever. The Indians followed up their championship with a second-place finish in the American League the next year, before falling into a purgatory of mediocre finishes for nearly 2 decades. Dunfield never came close to that attendance mark set in 1920, as annual attendance often fell below 500,000 throughout the 1920s. By the end of the decade, the ballpark was showing her limitations, and the city decided to fund the construction of her eventual successor, Cleveland Municipal Stadium. The franchise also changed hands twice throughout the decade. In 1922, team owner Jim Dunn passed away, and his assets were passed to his wife Edith. Edith owned the ball club until 1927, when she decided to put the franchise and ballpark up for sale. Real estate magnate Alva Bradley purchased the team. Bradley would helm the organization for nearly 2 decades before selling the team to Bill Veeck in 1946. Upon Bradley's purchase, the name of the ballpark was restored to League Park. In November of 1928, residents of Cleveland voted to build a new stadium on the lakefront to serve their community's sports and expo needs. Ground broke in June of 1930, and she was ready for use in July of 1931. Just over a year later, on July 31st, 1932, the Indians attempted to make a permanent move to the new stadium. But ultimately, this first foray only lasted for a season and a half before they moved back to League Park. Despite the larger seating capacity, the Great Depression was raging, and attendance remained relatively the same between League Park and Cleveland Stadium. Fans complained of a lack of home runs at the new ballpark thanks to its enormous outfield. The Indians returned to League Park full-time for the 1934 and 1935 campaigns, before the rest of their tenure at the old park was split with Cleveland Stadium. From my understanding, the Indians began playing night games, weekend games, and holiday games at the lakefront park beginning in 1936, and this arrangement continued until they abandoned League Park following the 1946 season. As a matter of fact, they progressively played more and more games at Cleveland Stadium throughout that time, and by 1942, the lakefront stadium hosted the majority of their games. Despite being slowly abandoned for the new stadium, another monumental milestone occurred at League Park during the summer of 1941, when on July 16th, Joe DiMaggio smacked a hit at League Park in what would go down as the 56th and final game of his legendary record hit streak. The next day, at Cleveland Stadium, the streak ended. By 1946, it was clear that League Park was outdated and it was time to move on. Bill Veeck purchased the team in 1946, spending one final season at the old ballpark before moving his Indians to Cleveland Stadium. After 51 seasons in Major League Baseball, League Park would be unceremoniously abandoned by the Indians. I want to make a big deal about the final game the Indians played there, but it appears to me that nobody seemed to care at the time it happened. Far from the pomp and circumstance displayed today upon the death of a ballpark, a measly 2,772 people showed up to attend that final Indians game at League Park on September 21st, 1946. The visiting Tigers came to town just as they had on that opening day in 1910, and beat the Cleveland Ball Club. And with that, the long-standing relationship between the Cleveland Indians and League Park ended. The Indians weren't the only baseball team to call League Park home during this time, though, as it allegedly began to host Negro League baseball in 1934 when the Cleveland Red Sox of the Negro National League played their 1 year of existence at the park, posting an abysmal 3-22 record. 5 years later, the Jacksonville Redcaps allegedly moved to League Park and became the Cleveland Bears of the Negro American League. They supposedly called the old ballpark home for 2 seasons. Take these with a grain of salt, as the only source I read claiming that either team played at League Park was Wikipedia. Baseball Reference itself has the ballpark notation suspiciously blank for both teams. So if anybody can clarify in the comments where the Red Sox or Bears played in Cleveland, I would greatly appreciate it. For the purposes of this discussion, let's just assume that they did play at League Park. In their 1939 season, the Bears finished with a 20-21 record, before finishing 1940 with a 21-16-1 campaign. Following the 1940 season, the team packed up and moved back to Jacksonville, Florida. League Park only sat without a Negro League team until 1942, when the Cincinnati Buckeyes moved to Cleveland and chose the ballpark as their home. The Buckeyes played at League Park through the 1948 season, treating their fans in Cleveland to winning baseball in each year they were there. They even won 2 Negro American League pennants while at League Park in 1945 and 1947, bringing postseason baseball back to Cleveland for the first time in 2.5 decades. They fell short in the 1947 series to the New York Cubans, but just 2 years prior, in 1945, they managed to win the World Series over the Homestead Grays, treating League Park to the last championship it would ever host. The Buckeyes would spend 1949 in Louisville, before attempting a return to Cleveland in 1950 and quickly dissolving. The Negro Leagues have, as of now, been officially historically recognized as major leagues, and given that, it's accurate to say that League Park continued to host Major League Baseball following the departure of the Indians. But an unfortunate side effect of this is the incomplete statistical record of the Negro Leagues, and given this, I can't find any information on what the last actual Major League game at League Park was. And in some small way, that breaks my heart. Some bit of me feels deeply disappointed that these structures that serve our communities for so long can be so easily forgotten and ignored. With little more than a fizzle, League Park was slowly abandoned by the baseball community, and by sometime in 1950, she hosted her last ball game. I've failed to mention it so far because I wanted to narrow the focus on baseball for most of the video, but professional and college football were played quite a lot at League Park while it operated. Some sources claim that local college and high school football were played at the park as far back as the mid-1890s. It continued to host both levels of football throughout the decades, but in 1929, the Western Reserve University football team moved in and called the ballpark home. They had 3 separate stints at the stadium, with their last season at League Park being played in 1949. In their final game at League Park, the Western Reserve Wildcats beat the Case Tech Rough Riders 30-0. Professional football made its way to the ballpark in the 1910s, when the Cleveland Tigers of the Ohio League moved in 1916. Their time at League Park lasted through the 1921 season before they dissolved ahead of the 1922 football season. While in Cleveland, the Tigers also went by the Indians for a few seasons, and their franchise managed to survive some pretty dramatic league-wide changes, as the Ohio League reformed into the American League of Professional Football in 1920, which reformed itself one more time in 1922 to the National Football League. In 1923, a new Cleveland Indians NFL team was established at League Park. A year later, their owner purchased the Canton Bulldogs, merging them with the Indians and renaming them to the Bulldogs. They would last through the 1927 season before folding. Just under a decade after that, in 1936, the Cleveland Rams were established and moved into League Park. Their first season was spent in the second iteration of the American Football League before they joined the NFL going into the 1937 season. They played in Cleveland through the 1945 season, hosting games at both League Park and Cleveland Stadium. Their tenure in their birth city culminated in them winning the NFL championship in 1945, defeating the Washington Redskins 15-14 at Cleveland Stadium. Following their first championship, the team packed their bags and moved to Los Angeles. While the Cleveland Browns were established in the mid-1940s and played their games at Cleveland Stadium, they began to use League Park as a training facility in 1952 and would continue to do so until 1965. And unless I'm mistaken, that was the last time a professional sports team would utilize the ballpark for any athletic purpose. For all intents and purposes, League Park was finished. Around the time that the Cleveland Buckeyes dissolved in early 1950, the Cleveland Indians, who still maintained ownership over League Park, sold the stadium to the city of Cleveland for $150,000. Slowly, over the next several decades, they would systematically dismantle the stadium. First, in 1951, came the demolishing of the majority of the stadium in order to prevent it from competing with Cleveland Stadium. They removed the outfield bleachers, upper deck that wrapped behind home plate, and I believe the giant wall in right field. When initial demolition was complete, all that remained was the lower deck bleachers that wrapped around home and extended down the baselines, and the home clubhouse under the third base bleachers. From my understanding, further seating was removed in the early 1960s, and in the following decades, little by little was chipped away. The grounds were converted for public recreational use, and the baseball diamond remained in place as tribute, but it fell into disrepair. By the early 2000s, all that remained from the original ballpark was the right field ticket booth and its adjacent wall, long having begun the process of eroding. The first long-standing home of Cleveland baseball and the birthplace of the Cleveland Indians, the home of 3 different baseball championships, abandoned and forgotten to time. Well, not completely forgotten. In the 2000s, Cleveland City Councilwoman and Howe resident Fannie Lewis began a grassroots effort to revive the ballpark in service of its community and in tribute to its history. Her efforts were successful, but she ultimately did not live to see them through, passing away in August of 2008. 6 years following her death, the ballpark was publicly opened once again. The baseball field was completely redone, featuring the original dimensions and a 40-plus foot tall wall in right field with support beams that jut out and cause wild bounces. The cottage-style ticket booth and its adjacent wall were restored, proudly standing as the last true remnants of the actual League Park. And in what might be the best cherry on top of any ballpark story I might ever tell, the rededicating of the ballpark also came with the opening of the Baseball Heritage Museum inside of the ticket building. The most baseball of all endings, poetically romantic. Instead of apartments, such as what now stand at the sites of the Polo Grounds or Ebbets Field, or the monstrosity of a parking lot that the former Comiskey Park now is. It feels so good to see one of these old baseball grounds get its due. No longer abandoned and forgotten to time, League Park, now known as the Fannie M. Lewis Community Park at League Park, serves her community once more. An invaluable educational resource and a conduit for creating connections across generations through this wonderful game we call baseball. Thank you for joining me on this fun exploration of League Park. I know she's been gone for a while, but if you somehow have any personal memories of the stadium, or if you played at the modern league park, let me know in the comments below. It's always a treat to read about your personal experiences, and it gives me about as good of a chance as I'll ever have to experience these defunct ballparks. As always, if you've made it this far into the video, I want to thank you. Don't forget to like the video, and if you're not subscribed, click that subscribe button. Your support makes it possible for me to continue pouring my passion into these essays. If you're interested in further supporting the channel, please consider becoming a member for just $1 a month. And also check out my merch store linked below. That's all I have for now, so until next time, if you like baseball, like this video and subscribe for more.